The fluorescent lights above me buzzed, casting a harsh glare on the gray walls of the office. My hand shook as I clutched my phone, knuckles white, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. I stared at the screen, willing myself to stay calm, to find the right words. My father was gone. The words echoed in my mind, surreal and jagged, as if saying them out loud would make them real. I dialed my manager's number, swallowing the lump in my throat, and waited as the line rang. When she answered, her voice was clipped, businesslike, as if I were just another item on her to-do list. I tried to explain, my voice cracking, that I needed to go home, that my family needed me, that I needed to say goodbye. She cut me off, her tone icy, reminding me of company policy, of deadlines, of how everyone has problems. My panic grew, desperation clawing at my chest. I pleaded, but she was unmoved, her words cold and final. I hung up, numb, staring at the empty office around me, feeling utterly alone. I never imagined what would happen when I came back. Growing up, my father was my anchor. He was the kind of man who never missed a school play, who taught me how to ride a bike and how to stand up for myself. He'd wake up early on weekends to make pancakes, humming old songs in the kitchen, and he always had time to listen, no matter how tired he was. Our home was filled with laughter, warmth, and the kind of love that made even the hardest days feel bearable. My father believed in hard work, but he believed even more in kindness. He'd say, "People matter more than anything else." Never forget that. I carried those words with me, even as I grew older and the world grew colder. When I started at the company, I was eager to prove myself. I arrived early, stayed late, volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. I thought if I worked hard enough, I'd be valued. My manager, Ms. Carter, was the opposite of my father in every way. She never smiled, never asked about anyone's family, never remembered birthdays or names. She ran the office like a machine, and we were just cogs. She praised numbers, not people. I watched as coworkers burned out, their efforts dismissed, their personal lives ignored. Still, I tried to be different. I covered shifts, picked up slack, and never complained, even when it meant missing dinners or family gatherings. I told myself it was temporary, that my loyalty would be noticed. But the more I gave, the more was expected. Ms. Carter never thanked me, never acknowledged the sacrifices I made. When my mother was hospitalized last year, I worked from her bedside, sending emails late into the night. When my best friend got married, I skipped the rehearsal dinner to finish a report. Each time, I told myself it was worth it, that I was building something important. But the office was a cold place, and no matter how hard I tried, I was invisible. Miss Carter's eyes would slide past me in meetings, her praise reserved for numbers on a spreadsheet, never the people behind them. At home, my father noticed the toll it was taking. He'd ask if I was happy, if I was taking care of myself. I'd brush him off, insisting I was fine, that I was just busy. He'd shake his head, worry etched in his features, and remind me that life was too short to spend it feeling small. I wanted to believe him, but I was trapped in a cycle of proving myself to someone who would never care. The contrast between my father's warmth and my manager's indifference grew sharper with every passing day. I clung to the hope that one day, my efforts would be recognized, that loyalty would mean something. But deep down, I knew the truth. In that office, people didn't matter. Only results did. And I was about to learn just how little my loyalty was worth. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that drags on forever, when my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I almost didn't answer. There was a mountain of work on my desk, and Miss Carter had just sent another urgent email. But something in my gut told me to pick up. My mother's voice was barely a whisper, trembling and raw. "He's gone," she said, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I couldn't breathe. My father, my anchor, was gone. I felt the ground vanish beneath me, replaced by a cold, bottomless ache. I stumbled out of my cubicle, barely aware of the curious glances from coworkers. My hand shook as I dialed Miss Carter's extension, my mind racing with panic and disbelief. When she answered, her tone was as flat as ever. I tried to explain, my words tumbling over each other, desperate for her to understand. My father just died. I need to go home. I need a few days, please. There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought I heard a flicker of sympathy, but it vanished as quickly as it came. I'm sorry, but we're short-staffed this week, she said, her voice clipped and unyielding. Company policy only allows for bereavement leave in certain cases, and we can't afford to lose you right now. You know how important this project is. I stared at the phone, disbelief turning to anger. My father was dead, and all she could talk about was a project deadline. I tried again, my voice breaking, but she cut me off. If you leave now, it will be considered an unexcused absence. I can't make exceptions. The words hit me like a slap. I felt trapped, suffocating under the weight of grief and rage. How could she be so heartless? How could a company policy matter more than a human life? I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but all I could do was stand there, numb and helpless. My coworkers avoided my eyes, pretending not to notice, and I realized just how alone I was in that moment. I hung up, my mind spinning. My mother needed me. My family needed me. But if I left, I risked losing my job, the job I'd sacrificed so much for. I was forced to make an impossible choice, one I knew I'd regret either way. The hours after that call blurred into a haze of grief and panic. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, unable to process the emails piling up. My father was gone, and I was expected to carry on as if nothing had happened. The thought made me sick. I tried to focus, to convince myself I could push through, but every keystroke felt meaningless. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, broken and lost. She needed me. My family needed me. I couldn't let them face this alone. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out of the office without another word. My heart pounded as I left the building, half expecting Miss Carter to chase after me, but she didn't. The city outside felt colder, emptier. I called my mother, promising I'd be home soon, and boarded the first train I could find. The ride was a blur of memories, my father's laugh, his steady hands, the way he'd always known how to make things right. Now, nothing felt right. I arrived home to a house heavy with silence, my mother's eyes red and swollen. We held each other, both of us adrift in a sea of loss. The days that followed were a whirlwind of arrangements and condolences. I moved through them in a fog, haunted by the thought that I'd miss my father's final moments. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I been too focused on work? Had I wasted precious time trying to please people who didn't care? I replayed every conversation, every missed call, wishing I could go back and do it differently. My family leaned on me, and I tried to be strong, but inside I was unraveling. At night, anxiety kept me awake. I knew I'd risked everything by leaving work. I checked my phone obsessively, dreading the inevitable messages from Miss Carter. The first email arrived on the second day. Your absence has been noted. Please be aware this is a violation of company policy. The words were cold, impersonal, a stark contrast to the warmth of the condolences from friends and family. I tried to push it aside, to focus on what mattered, but the fear lingered. What would happen when I returned? Would I even have a job to go back to? Meanwhile, the rumors started. A coworker texted me, saying people were talking, wondering why I'd left so suddenly, speculating about my unapproved vacation. Some said I'd finally snapped. Others whispered that I was in trouble. The office grapevine twisted my absence into something selfish, even scandalous. I wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, but I was too exhausted to fight. I felt betrayed by people I'd thought were friends, people I'd covered for and supported. Now, they were turning on me, eager to fill the silence with gossip. Each day away from work deepened my dread. I tried to be present for my family, to honor my father's memory, but the shadow of my job loomed over everything. I wondered if Miss Carter was already planning my replacement, if she was using my absence as proof that I wasn't committed enough. The thought made my stomach twist. I'd given so much to that company, sacrificed so much, and now it felt like none of it mattered. The funeral was small, intimate, filled with stories and tears. I stood by my mother's side, feeling both comforted and hollow. My father's friends spoke of his kindness, his loyalty, his unwavering support. I realized how different he was from the people I worked for, how much I missed his steady presence. As I said my final goodbye, I promised myself I'd try to live up to his example, to put people first, even if it cost me everything. But as I packed my bag to return to work, dread settled over me like a shroud. I didn't know what waited for me back at the office, but I sensed it wouldn't be forgiveness or understanding. I braced myself for the fallout, not realizing that while I was grieving, my manager was plotting something I never saw coming. Walking back into the office felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone already knew the script except me. Conversations hushed as I passed, eyes darted away, and the air was thick with judgment. My desk, once a place of routine comfort, now felt foreign, as if I no longer belonged. I tried to focus, to pretend nothing had changed, but the tension was impossible to ignore. Within minutes, Miss Carter called me into her office. Her expression was unreadable, her tone clipped and formal. She didn't ask how I was or offer condolences. Instead, she slid a document across the desk, a formal write-up for unexcused absence and abandoning the team during a critical period. My heart pounded as she announced my demotion, effective immediately. My responsibilities would be reduced, my projects reassigned. She made it clear in front of a junior colleague that I was being made an example. The humiliation stung more than I expected. I felt exposed, stripped of dignity, my grief twisted into a weapon against me. Miss Carter's words echoed in my mind. We all have personal problems, but the company comes first. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, but I could see the warning in her eyes. Any protest would only make things worse. I returned to my desk, cheeks burning, and tried to hold back tears. Coworkers avoided my gaze, some with pity, others with thinly veiled satisfaction. The isolation was suffocating. But as the hours dragged on, something inside me shifted. I thought of my father, how he taught me to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. I realized I couldn't let Miss Carter's cruelty define me. Quietly, I began to gather evidence, emails, messages, records of my request for leave. I reached out to colleagues I trusted, asking if they'd ever faced similar treatment. To my surprise, stories began to surface, tales of ignored emergencies, denied requests, and silent suffering. I wasn't alone. The more I learned, the more determined I became. Every day, I walked into that office with my head held a little higher. I documented everything, building a case piece by piece. The humiliation and vulnerability I'd felt began to transform into resolve. I was no longer just a victim. I was preparing to fight back. I knew it wouldn't be easy and I knew the risks, but I refused to let Miss Carter's version of the story be the only one that mattered. I was ready to reclaim my voice, no matter what it cost. The day I decided to act, the office felt different. I could sense the tension simmering beneath the surface, the way people glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I had spent weeks quietly gathering evidence, compiling emails, messages, and testimonies from coworkers who, like me, had suffered in silence. Each story was a thread in a tapestry of neglect and cruelty, woven together by Miss Carter's relentless pursuit of numbers over people. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I reached out to those who had confided in me, asking if they would stand with me. To my relief, they agreed. We were tired of being afraid. I scheduled a meeting with HR, requesting that it be held in the main conference room. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the truth to be heard. When the day arrived, I walked in with my head high, flanked by two colleagues who had also been denied leave during family emergencies. Miss Carter was already there, arms crossed, her expression icy and dismissive. She clearly thought this was just another complaint she could brush aside. But I was done being invisible. I began by calmly presenting my case. I laid out the timeline, my request for emergency leave, her denial, the emails that followed, the formal write-up and demotion. I read her exact words aloud, letting the room hear the coldness I'd felt. Then, one by one, my coworkers shared their stories. There was Anna, who had been denied time off when her mother was hospitalized, and James, who had been forced to work through his own father's funeral. Each account was met with stunned silence from HR, who scribbled notes furiously, their faces growing more troubled with every revelation. Ms. Carter tried to interrupt, insisting we were exaggerating. That company policy was clear. But I had come prepared. I produced the employee handbook, highlighting the sections she had twisted to suit her needs. I showed the pattern, how she had consistently denied leave to those she deemed less valuable, while quietly approving it for her favorites. The evidence was overwhelming. The room grew colder, the weight of truth settling over everyone. The confrontation reached its peak when Anna, her voice trembling but resolute, revealed that she had kept a journal of every interaction with Miss Carter. She read excerpts aloud, documenting not just denied leave, but belittling comments, threats, and subtle retaliation. The HR manager's face paled as the scope of the abuse became undeniable. Miss Carter's mask began to crack. She stammered, tried to deflect blame, but the tide had turned. The room was no longer hers to control. Then, just as I thought the worst was over, someone else stood up. It was Mark, a quiet analyst who rarely spoke in meetings. He cleared his throat, his hands shaking, and said, "There's something else you need to know." The room fell silent. Mark revealed that he had been pressured by Ms. Carter to falsify performance reports, making certain employees look worse on paper, so she could justify denying raises and promotions. He had kept copies of the original reports and the altered versions, afraid to come forward until now. The shock in the room was palpable. HR demanded to see the documents, and Mark handed them over, his relief visible. Miss Carter's face went from red to ashen. She tried to protest, but no one was listening anymore. The evidence was irrefutable. The HR manager announced that Miss Carter would be suspended pending a full investigation, effective immediately. She was asked to leave the room, her authority stripped away in front of everyone. As she gathered her things, I felt a wave of emotions, relief, vindication, and a deep, aching sadness for all the pain she had caused. My coworkers looked at me with gratitude and newfound respect. We had done what once seemed impossible. We had stood up together and forced the company to see us as people, not just numbers. But the real shock came when someone else stepped forward with a secret that changed everything. In the days that followed, the office felt lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. Miss Carter's absence was palpable, but not in the way I'd feared. People spoke more freely. Laughter returned to the break room, and the tension that had once choked every conversation began to dissolve. HR sent out a formal notice. Miss Carter was suspended pending a full investigation, and employees were encouraged to come forward with any additional concerns. For the first time, it felt like our voices mattered. I received an official apology from HR, acknowledging the mishandling of my leave and the pain it had caused. But what meant more to me were the quiet words from my colleagues. Anna left a note on my desk, thanking me for giving her the courage to speak up. James brought me coffee and said he finally felt seen. Even Mark, who had always kept to himself, stopped by to say he was grateful I hadn't let fear win. Their support was a balm I hadn't known I needed. Still, the victory was bittersweet. I thought often of my father, wishing I could tell him what had happened, how his lessons had guided me through the darkest moments. He had always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it meant standing alone. I realized now that I hadn't been alone at all. By speaking up, I'd helped others find their voices too. There were moments when I wondered if it had all been worth it, the risk, the humiliation, the sleepless nights. But then I'd remember my father's words, people matter more than anything else. I saw now how true that was. The company had tried to make me feel small, but in the end, it was our humanity, our willingness to stand together, that changed everything. I walked through the office with a new sense of purpose, no longer afraid of being invisible. My colleagues met my eyes not with pity, but with respect. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would always be people like Ms. Carter, but I also knew I had the strength to face them. I had honored my father's memory in the best way I knew how, by refusing to let injustice go unchallenged, and by reminding everyone, including myself, that we all deserve to be treated with dignity and compassion. Months passed, and life slowly found a new rhythm. I left the company not long after the investigation ended, accepting a position at a smaller firm where people greeted each other by name and kindness wasn't seen as a weakness. The difference was immediate. My ideas were heard, my boundaries respected, and I felt, for the first time in years, like I belonged. The scars from my old job lingered, but they reminded me of what I'd survived and what I'd learned. One bright afternoon, I visited my father's grave, a bouquet of wildflowers in hand. I knelt beside the headstone, tracing his name with my fingers, and told him everything. I spoke of the pain, the fear, and the moment I finally stood up for myself and others. I told him how his words had echoed in my heart, guiding me when I felt lost. I promised him I would never let anyone silence me again. To anyone listening, to anyone who's ever felt small or powerless, I want you to know your voice matters. Stand up, even if it shakes. I lost my father, but I found my voice, and I'll never let anyone take that from me again.